I mean, I think many people will... In fact, it goes beyond "I told you so" to many people. They will be shocked and even angry to hear the very people that said, gotta lock everything down, now saying, well, you know, there's also going to be an effect of locking everything down.
Yeah, good afternoon. I suppose the first thing is it's probably a positive to acknowledge it, because if this is a kind of a paper for future kind of chief medical officers to be kind of picking up as a what would you do in the future, to acknowledge is a good start. I think when you break down what they're kind of talking about, there's two parts to this, isn't there, Ian? There's the bit around where operations were cancelled, or delays, so waiting lists have been affected, and that will lead to excess deaths. We've talked about it recently. We've seen over half a year of higher than expected deaths across the country, and that's not just to do with COVID. We are seeing the heart issues. But there's the other part of this as well, Ian. So people will say, well, people didn't come forward during the pandemic. That's true. Now the stay home, protect the NHS. Some people took that literally to stay home and not bother the NHS. So there's that part. But the NHS itself, in particular the GP surgeries, many people wanted to go forward, but it was very difficult to get appointments during the pandemic as well. So there's that aspect to it. And I think just to kind of think of it more broadly in terms of, OK, it's not just what the chief medical officers were doing. You look at the government policy last winter, Ian, where Boris Johnson basically put all his eggs in, let's boost everybody down to the age of 18. And what that meant then was that we were kind of prioritising booster vaccinations for people, say, in their 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And getting GP surgery, then having to cancel kind of checkups for elderly people. Absolute nonsense in terms of kind of the policy in terms of GP surgeries should not have been doing that. And they did that in a direct response to the government, not just the medical advice.
You'd think that, I know there was these sage characters that sat around the table, obviously throwing advice towards the government. There would have been other advisors, one assumes, in the kind of inner sanctum who were also proffering their thoughts. You might think, you know, one person around the table, Jamie, would have gone, do you know what, this is really going to come back and bite you, because there will be, I mean, you could look at the economic factor in all of this. I mean, that's now a well-worn conversation about what's happened to businesses, what's happened to our national debt, courtesy of furlough. We can go into all of that, but in terms of the health side of it, somebody must have been agitating towards the Prime Minister saying, this is going to be a problem going forward.
Well, I would hope that was going on. I think you probably get that kind of groupthink kind of mentality with everybody around the table. Remember, at the time, every single day you were being told across a lot of the main news channels about how many COVID cases there were, how many deaths were related to COVID. So all the focus of the media, I suppose, was talking about COVID, not really about what the longer-term effects would be. And remember, a lot of these early decisions were made on modelling. And it was always difficult, Ian, to check how robust the models would be, because obviously the models would say, if you don't do this, this is, you know, Armageddon's going to hit. So the government did something. It was only last Christmas, Ian, where Boris Johnson said, OK, I'm not going to follow the sage advice. I'm not going to lock down again last Christmas. And then we were able to track the modelling, and what that showed is that the total deaths last winter were 90% lower than what the modelling was suggesting. So I think there's also the modelling. It's not just Whitty and Balance and the people who were advising on those things. It's the whole look in terms of the data that went into all of this and the consequences across the whole health system. And it's just tragic. You know, I don't think there's any winners in saying I told you so. But sadly, there will be people now not on this planet now because of some of the decisions. And I still think it was a bit premature to have been giving kind of knighthoods out to some of these individuals before the COVID inquiry has taken place and finished.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because at the time, you know, we kind of, you know, the first lockdown, we broadly went with it because, you know, nobody really knew what was happening. Nobody is disputing that, you know, there were people dying either with or from COVID. That's a reality. But simultaneously, as we moved through the story and we did begin to know more about it, I think perhaps we expected that the advice would change a little, but it didn't really. Once they thought, oh, there's an uptick in numbers, we'll just lock down again. And that included health facilities and people's treatments.
Yeah, and if you look at the more recent waves of COVID, so we had one kind of during the summer, we've had one during the autumn. We're probably actually in this week now starting to see another upsurge in COVID. So we'll probably have another wave coming up over the next month or so.
But we're not locking anything down.
And exactly, we didn't lock down for the last few waves, and things went up pretty much like they did in the previous waves. So obviously, there's a huge difference now. We've had mass people who've had lots of vaccinations across the country. We've had lots of people who've had the infection. So it's in a totally different place to where we were. But it's not hard to foresee that people have kind of died because of missed operations and kind of things. And I suppose one of the facts I was looking at this week, Ian, because Chris Whitty's and the paper's talking about heart issues, the number of people waiting on an NHS waiting list in England, this is just England on its own, for heart kind of treatment has gone up 50%.
Wow.
And we are seeing those excess deaths already from heart issues. So what he's warning may happen already is.
Yeah.